Hey guys, welcome back to Falcon Central Radio, part of the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, joined as usual by my co-host, Matt Karoly. Today we are joined by a third wheel on today's episode. You know him as Lieutenant Dan from Unintentional Grounding, the YouTube channel. You see him on Twitter at Unintentional Grounding. Welcome to the show, Dan.
First he calls me a third wheel. Then he messes up my name. Damn. No, it's great. No, it's great.
We're off to a good start. Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about the Falcons trade of Eric Saubert. We're going to talk about some of their roster moves. We're going to talk a little bit about this last preseason game against the Miami Dolphins. We're going to be talking about this upcoming game against the New York Jets, and of course, we'll be answering your guys' mailbag questions throughout the show. So, off to a rocky start, but let's jump right into it. Matt, the Falcons made a couple of roster moves over the weekend. They cut your boy Hamp Cheevers. They added a linebacker.
Hardly knew the champ.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say we hardly knew the. That was a guy I talked about last week. Excited to see. He had a lot of fans. In the draft community. Smaller, undersized guy, so he's going to have to play the slot, corner spot, and where we saw him predominantly. And I guess we learned that you drop easy interceptions in preseason games. You're fixing to get cut. What happened. I believe there was a communication and coverage that led to one of the other Dolphins touchdowns. So he was on the wrong side of that too. And Falcons decided to cut him the next day and brought in Chase. I don't really know much about linebacker. Whether this means anything as far as how the team sees the linebacker depth chart, I wouldn't be so sure. It's another body, camp body to evaluate. He's a practice squad candidate. Kind of stinks to see Cheevers on such a short leash, and I think even the Raiders who picked him up a few days later actually cut him today as well. So it seems like he's going from team to team, and hopefully wishing the best he can land on his feet and land somewhere else throughout the league.
Now, Dan, do you have a thought on Hamp Cheevers, or you want to get to the sort of the big roster move that the Falcons made on Monday with the Eric Saubert trade?
I don't really have much to say about Mr. because I didn't get to see him a lot on the field, so we can just move on. That's fine. I hope that he does get another opportunity somewhere else and continues his NFL career as I wish all other NFL players.
Okay. I was going to say something smart, but I'll let it go.
This is your show. You do you, man.
No, I'll let it go. We got plenty of time for that. Monday, the Falcons made a trade, sending Eric Saubert, the tight end, to the New England Patriots for a conditional 7th-round pick. Essentially, if you want to break it down, even though I saw a report today that they are getting the conditional pick that the Patriots got from the Philadelphia Eagles, but, the Falcons gave away a conditional 7th-round pick in 2020 for Jordan Richards last year. So you could argue that this was a, player-for-player swap. Falcons got Jordan Richards. They send New England Eric Saubert. In that term, I don't know if the Falcons got the better end of the deal, but we'll sort of see how that winds up working out in that regard. Dan, what are your thoughts on this trade?
Well, I guess my initial thought is that because I always think outside the box. I think of maybe there's a pipeline here where we're kind of gifting each other some late round guys, maybe some special team talent back and forth. But I guess the ultimate thought is that with this trade, even if you potentially get that 7th-round pick, the Patriots do this all the time, where they trade off guys that are really low round, or they receive guys really low round. They try to get a little bit of value out of them, and they usually cut them before things are really going. Getting that value at the end of the day anyway. So I wonder what the actual conditions for that 7th round pick are. And also at the end of the day, I think that Saubert he served his purpose for what it was worth. But the lack of work on special teams that was productive, the lack of key blocking for him on the field when given opportunities. I talked with you earlier today, Freeman, about look at all of these guys out here that are making these catches. And Eric Saubert was one of those. He was given opportunities. But at the end of the day, you have to be a full football player and not just one position and one arc of the position. And I think that's maybe a potential reason why often he was traded off and Graham, or maybe they're okay with tight ends currently, and they'll be carrying of another position. Is the reason why this all happened in the first place.
Yeah. Thank you. Matt, what are your thoughts on this trade?
When I saw it happen, I wasn't totally shocked. I was a guy that I written about earlier this summer that I thought he was on the roster bubble and needed to have a good summer. Needed to show tangible improvement. Over a guy like Logan Paulson, who I think they brought in to be the insurance policy if he didn't do that. So to see them move on with him. It tells me that they saw enough from him through these first two preseason games. We'll get to it in a moment, but Eric was one of my 3 down players in this past Thursday's game in Miami. He had a critical drop. Just didn't really show to keep him around. And Dan Quinn made the point in one of his press conferences this week that from Saubert is a sign that they're deeper in certain other positions and want to hold on to certain other positions a little bit more than tight end. And I think they're going to keep 3 tight ends on the 53-man roster, and they're likely going to then keep maybe an extra running back, whether it's 5 running backs if Kenyon Barner wins the return battle, or extra receiver if they want to keep on the Hardy, and potentially also want to keep a guy like Alameda Zacchaeus to be a 7th guy, special teams guy, plus depth receiver. So I think that has a lot to do with this trade. Is they were comfortable holding on to 3 tight ends. Maybe again, Dan brought up Jaden Graham, who's a guy that has shown improvement. Coming off the practice squad last year for the entire year, he has shown some improvement. Has made some plays this preseason. Maybe they're going to get a long look, and he's a guy that's still fighting for one of those final spots if they do keep 4 tight ends. But yeah, again, not totally shocked. Wish Eric the best of luck. I guess when the Patriots are involved in a trade like this, taking on a guy, there is, that curiosity from the fan base that, what does an organization like the Patriots see in him that maybe we didn't see? But I just think there's more opportunity for him there. I mean, again, he was going to be the third tight end in New England, 2nd tight end or 1st tight end for the time being until Ben Watson comes back. But yeah, not totally shocked. And I just think this means something for other spots on the roster, like running back or receiver, like I mentioned.
So, yeah, this Eric Saubert trade, I think it's going to be interesting to sort of see what the Falcons do at the tight end position. If they do go with sort of the 3 guys that they have, with Hooper, Paulson, and Luke Stocker. I think that's a serviceable group. Obviously, I think Hooper's good. I think Stocker's a solid sort of role player for this team. And, I think really what's missing from this group is whether or not the Falcons have a viable option in the passing game in terms of, in the event of an injury to Austin Hooper. I don't think that's Stocker. I don't think that's Paulson. I thought there was potential that Eric Saubert could be that guy. Talking about what Dan and I had a conversation with, I think I think you can certainly make a very easy argument that Saubert wasn't bringing it as a blocker, and that's a big reason why the team decided to move on from him. But my takeaway from that is if the Falcons, drafted Eric Saubert hoping that he would become a capable blocker, they probably had the wrong idea behind drafting him in the first place, because that was not necessarily where his bread was going to be buttered in the NFL, and really as a pass catcher. So I still held out hope that Saubert could be potentially an option for this Falcon team, or at least an upgrade over the likes of guys like Paulson and Stocker in that passing game in the event of an injury to Austin Hooper. So I felt like there was value for him as a depth piece. I do think Jaden Graham has been one of the more improved players. He was a player that didn't necessarily impress me last summer, and we'll talk about him a little bit later in the show. But I thought he's come on, and played really well, and really made a legit bid to potentially make this roster as a fourth tight end, and potentially, if he continues at this rate, maybe even leapfrogging a guy like Logan Paulson, and bring a little bit more in the passing game than Logan Paulson does in that regard. But whether or not he's going to be the option in the event of an injury to Austin Hooper that can step in and give you production as a pass catcher, I think, we're a long way from that point in time, or at least feeling good about that. So for me, at least, if the Falcons wanted to decide to move on from Eric Saubert, that's like, I don't have a problem with that. That's their prerogative. But I do think, that is a hole on the team in terms of having somebody that you can look at and say, you know what? Yeah, we do need to have our linebacker, whether it's Anthony Barr or, Harrison Smith or whoever the heck it is during the regular season, that is going to have to cover that guy and be like that guy can make an impact in the passing game. I don't think that's Luke Stocker. I don't think that's Logan Paulson. So if the Falcons felt that wasn't Eric Saubert, okay. But I do feel like that is a position that the Falcons need to be at least on the lookout when we get to the waiver wire at the end of the month for a possible player that could be a potential upgrade there. Because I do think sort of Stocker and Paulson, while very capable blockers, don't really bring a whole lot other than that. And I feel like, you should want to value the tight end position a little bit more than just guys that are good blockers, particularly in this offense.
Did you see that? Like, I understand thinking those things about Saubert heading into the summer as far as what he can offer as a pass catcher. But did you honestly, after these first 2 weeks, see that from him as a pass catcher? Because I don't think he put that on tape.
No, he didn't do that this summer. I thought he showed progress there over the course of 2017 and 2018. But because we didn't really get to see a lot of him during that time, we don't really know. So that's more, I guess it's more speculative on my point because, again, because I think part of the issue is maybe the Falcons only valued, a backup tight end based off of their ability to block. And because that wasn't a strength for Saubert, we didn't get as many opportunities to see him over the last 2 seasons that maybe we could have seen.
I mean, I guess that is the line though. Is like if the Falcons potentially this is kind of future casting, but if the Falcons potentially do not necessarily value tight ends like that, and they're glad that they have Hooper, they have somebody that can stretch the field and be fantastic, then maybe it's not necessarily that they don't want other good tight ends. It's that they potentially might not use tight ends as much as you think maybe they will. I mean, I'm not talking about the group here, but I'm just talking about like people in general that maybe thinking that tight ends are going to be a big part of this offense is actually not the truth here. Yeah. But I mean, that's speculative, obviously. So We're just going to be kind of speculating on that until it actually happens week 1. But again, it could be a sign that they value wide receivers more.
I think you're onto something because, I mean, the point of the offseason when I knew that ship had sailed was when they brought, when they signed Stocker. I didn't expect a tight end free agent acquisition like that. When they brought back Paulson, that was like, all right, because I wanted them going into the draft. I wanted them to draft one of these tight ends because I thought it was a pretty deep draft for the tight end. And I still held out hope based on the free agent acquisitions because, Paulson was only a vet min contract. I thought maybe there's still a chance they'd look at the tight end market in the draft. When that didn't happen, I'm like, yeah, I don't think they necessarily value a secondary pass-catching tight end, in the event Hooper goes down or in the event you want to play more 12 personnel and have 2 legitimate threats out there. That's when I knew it's like, yeah, I don't think they necessarily value tight ends as much as we might want outside of Austin Hooper. And again, it's good that they have, a Pro Bowl caliber in Austin Hooper, and all expectation is they're going to lock him up for the future. But expecting maybe them to pair him with a rookie to have a 2 punch like the Eagles have in Philly, maybe we should set our expectation a little bit lower, and they'd rather invest in the wide receivers like they do with Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones and Mohamed Sanu, and if they eventually draft a high-end replacement for Sanu. So, yeah, I think you are onto something, Dan. As far as tight ends go, we might just have Hooper and then kind of the complementary blocking types like the Stockers and the Paulsons of the world.
Yeah, I mean, look, as long as Hooper's healthy, that's not going to be an issue. I get, this is where we get into the conversation about depth and how important depth is and building your roster and all these various conversations that we like to argue and debate about for 6 months, and then the season happens and we'll just see how it all winds up playing out. But like,
AKA Brian Hill.
So it's one of those things where we'll just hopefully Hooper stays healthy and it's a non-issue by the end of the year. But it is a concern. Just because we're coming off of a season where injuries were a major issue, it's much more of a pressing concern, at least at the front of my mind, than it probably would have been 2 years ago. So.
All Falcons fans currently have the fear of having another 2018 because 2018 happened. So of course that's going to be the mass hysteria with all Falcons fans currently. Is that position that doesn't have any position enough that doesn't have enough going to be questioned, is going to be questioned, prodded, poked, put under a microscope, and people are going to panic. So like if Matt Ryan goes down, what do you have? Sims.
Well, yeah. You can build up good depth, but I mean, they're depth guys for a reason. They're not starters. If they were starters, they'd be starters elsewhere. So, the Falcons, I credit them. They wanted to make sure the offensive line, if they did have an injury, they would have starting caliber guys to back them up. They've done that, but you can't do that at every single spot in the roster. And, I think you can say, for the most part, other than a couple teams in the league, if they lose your tight end one, you're kind of having to go on the waiver wire and pick someone up as a fill-in. Like, you're not just going to have the depth where you can place a starting caliber tight end there and continue the ball rolling down the hill. I mean, it's going to affect most teams the same way if they lost their tight end one.
I want to move on from this conversation because we can get bogged down in this. It's not about having starting caliber players. It's about having capable backups. Like Justin Hardy is like marginally a starting caliber player, but he's a capable backup. The hope is that Russell Gage, not a starting caliber. There's not a team in the league that Russell Gage should be starting on, but the hope is that he's a capable backup. He's a guy that can give you production off the bench. Kamal Ishmael, if you're starting him at linebacker, you probably have a terrible defense, okay? But he's a capable backup. That's what we're talking about. It's not about having, two starting caliber tight ends. If you can do that, then you're the Philadelphia Eagles. But it's having capable backups, and that's where I think we have the question with the Falcons tight end positions.
So Stalker, you don't think he's a capable backup?
I think he's a good blocking tight end, but if you're asking him to play, 40 snaps a game, and you're going to start throwing him the ball, you're going to be left a lot wanting there.
Fair enough.
Okay. So now that we've gotten that debate and discussion, we got a bunch of players back from injury. Calvin Ridley, Desmond Trufant, Duke Riley, Rashid Hageman, all back to practice. We see Marcus Green came back as well from hamstring injuries. Kenyon Barner went down with an injury, on Monday and did not practice today. James Carpenter is still going to be held out. Foye Olakun status is up in the air for Thursday. The Falcons will get an update from Caleb McGarry at the end of the week. A lot of updates. Sort of, Matt, start us off. Any sort of these injury issues that sort of you have your eye on that you're going to keep watching over the next couple of days?
Yeah, I mean, the ones that are fighting for those final roster spots, so like Duke Riley returning to practice, that couldn't come soon enough for him. Hopefully we see him for the first time this preseason because I feel like, he's almost lost his spot at this point. I think Jermaine Grace has leapfrogged him on the depth chart. That's my opinion. So he needs to, if he wants a shot, again, they can maybe hold on to 6 linebackers or 7 linebackers, depending on, how they view Kamal Ishmael still. But, Duke Riley is a guy that needs to show something in these final 3 preseason games. Hopefully now he's healthy in order to do that. So he's someone, I think this was a significant injury update. We should see him on Thursday. Rashid Hageman was another one, although according to D-Led today, he was off to the side with the trainer. So I'm not sure what that means for his status on Thursday, but he's another one that's fighting for one of those final D-line spots. Marcus Green returning is another one. I think the return battle is a huge one. It's one of the ones that's left unsettled as far as, shaking out this final 53-man roster. Him coming back's huge to get back and to reassert himself since he did not get off to a good start 2 weeks ago against the Broncos. And then I think in relation to that, Kenyon Barner now suffering an injury. If he doesn't go on Thursday again, because right now, if you ask me who's the return man starting week 1, if the season were to start tomorrow, I'd say Kenyon Barner did more than Marcus Green has to lock down that job. So Barner being out opens the door now for Green to get back into that competition and maybe leapfrog him, for the return man spot. So the ones that affect those guys, I think, are most critical. I mean, Calvin Ridley, obviously, it's good to see that he's back. Good to see Desmond Trufant back. But those guys are locked into starters roles. So as long as they're ready by week 1, that's all that I'm really concerned about. I don't need to see anything from them in the preseason. I just need to see guys like Riley, Hagman, and Green battling for some of these spots. It's important for them to be healthy and to be out there on the field, showing the coaching staff what they can do.
Dan, what are your thoughts on some of these injuries that you're looking at with the Falcons currently dealing with?
I'm actually going to be even shorter than Matt here. I'm just going to say that currently, of the injuries that are listed and the guys that are going to be returning and some of the guys that are being held off, this 53-man roster is pretty much already set. I mean, for the most part, I mean, it is as set as it's going to get. The last maybe what, Matt? What do you think? Maybe
I think
last
three.
five
I think
spots,
three spots is what I've speculated.
Yeah. So maybe less than 5 spots. Maybe are the ones that are left to be battled. I mean, and we've had an extra preseason game already. This will be our 3rd one already. These coaches know exactly who they want. I don't think anybody's going to leapfrog anybody anytime soon. There may be one roster surprise, but I think they pretty much told us everything that is going to happen. I think there is something interesting. I wonder what they're going to be doing with Ricky Ortiz, because honestly, if we do decide to carry a fullback, maybe that's another reason why we got rid of Saubert, is to keep the fullback, and instead one of those guys is just going to continue to be a blocking tight end. But hey, man, that's just where I'm at.
Fair enough. Okay, so let's get into the conversation about last week's preseason game against the Miami Dolphins. And as we did a week ago, what we like to do is we like to do 3 up, 3 down. Talking about 3 players that each of us think their stock is up after the most recent preseason game, and 3 players that their stock is down. And Matt, go ahead, kick us off with your 3 players that you think are up.
Yeah, so my first one, and he was the one that got fans buzzing on Twitter, I think, during the game, was Austin Larkin, a guy relatively unknown, undrafted guy out of Purdue last year, spent the camp with the Dallas Cowboys, and that's when I kind of started making the parallel that Austin Larkin's short career path compared to the guy I'm going to compare him to, which is Stephen Means. Stephen Means, a few years, but I think they're not only their profile as far as their size and maybe some of their athletic ability and maybe their college production. Means was a little bit more productive, Larkin not so much, but just the fact that Means was kind of buried on, a good Philly defensive line. And I think that's, Austin Larkin's similar position, went to a program out in Dallas where D-line was kind of stacked, and, even more so now. He would have been overshadowed when, since they brought in Quinn and some of those other guys. But a guy that, some of the Dallas media members said was a sleeper candidate, definitely was impressing some of the coaches, including Rod Marinelli. And, obviously didn't last there, but now is coming over to Atlanta. And through the first 2 games, is showing some stuff. I mean, he's rolling with the twos at that edge spot. And, Aaron, you and I have talked about, back when we were kind of previewing mini camp and training camp and all that, the way for some of these, undrafted guys to make the roster is, where's the opportunity on the depth chart to make the roster. And for the Falcons, I mean, edge is one of their thinnest positions. I mean, you got Takk McKinley, you got Vic Beasley, you got Adrian Claiborne, who, again, we're not exactly sure what his role this second go-around is going to be, whether he's going to continue to be that nickel interior rusher, if he's going to play more on the edge. I seem to lean towards the latter just because, again, of how thin they are. But that's really it. So there's an opportunity for Austin Larkin if he continues this play that he showed, in the Miami game with a sack off a sweet spin move. He had 5 tackles, 1 for a loss. If he keeps this up for a fourth edge, especially because they're running this new 5-2 base defense, Austin Larkin could be that guy because, again, I think he's played well in a similar position. I think Chris Odom has continued to be a force, had a ton of pressures, in his limited time on the field Thursday. So he's another one who, again, I think is fighting with Austin Larkin, is fighting with Rashid Hageman, is fighting with Justin Zimmer for one of those last defensive line roles. It's just a matter of, where do they want to, where do they want more depth? I think they're pretty set at the interior, so I'd almost lean to the Larkin and Odom that have the best shot, but we'll see what happens. I mean, again, Justin Zimmer's played well too. He was one of my standouts last week. But yeah, I think if Austin Larkin can keep this up, there's a shot that he can find himself as like that 53 man on the roster. 2 of my other guys I want to highlight, Jermaine Grace, again, has had a strong summer. He's kind of like the Brian Hill for me on defense for the Falcons. I think I find it hard to believe that he won't find his way on the 53-man roster when it's all said and done. Quinn talking about, kind of comparing him a little bit to Deion Jones with his coverage ability, his sideline-to-sideline ability. That was something that was, sorely lost when Deion Jones was out for the better part of the season last year. So to find a guy who can do some similar things, albeit not at the same level as Deion, but again, showing playmaking ability with his near pick 6 of Josh Rosen last week. That was impressive, baiting the youngster into that throw. And then the last one, Olamide Zaccheaus, again, a guy who's been talked about a lot on this show and, several beat writers, the Atlanta media, played well in practice, starting to carry it forward to the game, had probably one of the best highlight reel catches you're going to see throughout this entire 2019 preseason across the league. That toe tapper along the sidelines, that was a thing of beauty. So again, if he continues to show the playmaking ability, and now I think we're going to see a little bit of him in the return game, it sounds like maybe coming up, he's one of those guys. Quinn talked about potentially keeping 7 receivers on the 53-man roster, and it could be because of a guy like Zaccheaus. If again, they want to keep Hardy as well, but if they don't want to let Zaccheaus go, he could be that 7th and final guy. So if he keeps this up, again, I think he's got a good shot to make it.
Okay, so I'll add my 3 pretty quickly. Jaden Graham, a guy I mentioned earlier, the tight end out of Yale, second-year guy, was on the practice squad last year. I felt like last summer was a guy that got put on the practice squad because the Falcons needed another body. Didn't really do much in the preseason, I thought, to really merit that. And the Falcons was like, we need a body. He's been here for 3 months, so might as well put him on the practice squad. And I think he, clearly based off of what he's done in these first 2 games, he made the most of that time. And he's been developing. We saw his blocking. I think his blocking is right now the best asset. We've seen him make some nice catches in the game. He's an athletic player. So there is potential and upside there. Going back to that Dolphin game, I think it was the Kenyon Barner screen that should have been a touchdown, but wasn't. He had a really good block on that play. The other player I'll highlight is Tack McKinley. I know Dan did a film breakdown of him today on his channel on YouTube. You can find the link to that in the description. I'm sure Dan will plug that later on in the show. But, this was the first opportunity we got to see for Tack this preseason. And I've sort of been questioning whether or not, Tack losing weight, I kind of like Tack being more that inside-outside, maybe not 275 like he said he was, but, 265, somewhere in that range. And he looked good. He played well in for the series and a half or whatever he had. So positive to that. So I'll certainly revisit that take. And then Jamon Brown didn't come in and light the world on fire, but had a really solid game in his first start. And with James Carpenter dealing with an injury, gets another opportunity against the Jets team. And one of the things that Dan Quinn mentioned, a couple of weeks ago before the preseason kicked off is like really there has really been no separation between Jamon Brown and James Carpenter. Well, we haven't seen James Carpenter play. It doesn't seem likely that he's going to play this week. We might get to see him against the Redskins next week. But if Jamon Brown can have another solid performance and hold his own, he doesn't have to go out there and be a dominant player. He just has to be effective and solid in all these various things. then I think there's a pretty good chance that he's going to be able to create that separation that Dan Quinn was referring to a little bit early. But Dan, I know Matt and I sort of went through all these three players. Any other players that you want to add, or any of these players that we discussed that you want to piggyback off of?
I know that there's actually two guys that we didn't mention that I think one of them was not necessarily about stock up or stock down, that just I saw improvement from the first preseason game to the second preseason game, was Chris Lindstrom. I mean, he took people and he was bodying them. Every move was technical. Every move was well precisely done. So honestly, really, really good stuff from him. Ty Sombrilo. I know maybe people weren't really looking at the right tackle position, and I know Aaron Freeman over here is he's giving me the smile. But actually, Ty Sombrilo was out there and did an amazing job from his position, and he was helping out Lindstrom, and they were playing like a pair of fiddles, like literally, really, really well together. So I wonder how much longer it will take until McGarry walks into that spot, or if they're happy currently with Ty. It's very interesting. And also, I wanted to quickly just piggyback off of one thing that Aaron said, that Jaden Graham, it's interesting because there's actually two plays during the Dolphins game late, actually, when we needed to score some touchdowns, where Jaden Graham was completely wide open down the middle of the field. No free safety over the top of him has beaten his man, and Sims just doesn't see him. And I keyed in on these two things that I've actually got a great a Jaden Graham video coming out soon. That if he just floats two of these, if this is Matt Ryan, I said this to myself when I saw Freeman's comments earlier today. I said, if this is Matt Ryan hits this guy for a touchdown twice, and this looked like Austin Hooper. So I wonder if that's one of the reasons why the route running and the combination and knowing where he needs to be on the field, if a good quarterback, not saying that Matt Sims is not very good, but I'm just saying that if Matt Ryan was out there, Matt Ryan hits those twice for touchdowns. And that's important. I think that's important that we key in on those. But those are my three things that I just saw from the Dolphins game.
Matt, go ahead and talk about sort of the players that you have down.
Yeah, so I mentioned, I had Eric Saubert originally on my list. I'll keep him on there. I mean, again, I didn't think he showed enough in 2 games, but even so, in the second Miami game, he had a drop that was pretty noticeable. So he was one of them. Duke Riley's one too. And again, it's just from the standpoint, just like they say, you can't make the club if you're in the tub. And the show, I believe he's lost his spot, and now he has to win it back if he is going to remain on this team. So the fact that he's been out these 2 games, I was excited to see him play in this game last Thursday in Miami, and until game day when a bunch of people told me that he had a hip flexor issue that kept him out. But it sounds like we're going to see him hopefully stay. So again, I believe he has to show something. He has to show something that Eric Saubert didn't, because he has to show that he's improved, because, too many coverage lapses, too many mental communication issues last year when he was filling in for Deion Jones, that if he shows more of the same this year in his 3rd year, again, I don't think he's long for this world as an Atlanta Falcon. And then the third one, and again, I think a lot of it, there wasn't a whole lot he can do, but I think Jordan Miller, obviously, he was targeted heavily when he first came in, and I believe he might have given 4 catches all on one drive alone. Now, again, I say there wasn't a whole lot he can do because Preston Williams made some unbelievable plays with Jordan Miller draped all over him. So you got to give him some credit there. But, yeah, I mean, again, you wanted to see Jordan Miller kind of, take some momentum that he had from the first preseason game when he got his hands on the ball a few times and continue to run with it. He didn't necessarily do that. But I believe he'll be fine. Again, he's a guy with a good head on his shoulders. A few people, Will McFadden being one of them, wrote a nice piece on him on AtlantaFalcons.com, talking about where he's at in his headspace as far as how confident he is and challenging the likes of Julio Jones one-on-one in practice and whatnot. So, I have no doubts he's going to be fine in his development. Now, whether this means Sheffield has a leg up. Maybe, I'm starting to lean that maybe Sheffield right now is the fourth or fifth corner, depending on if Bloody Ray Wilson's considered the fourth. Maybe Jordan's the game day inactive. I don't think that's the end of the world again. Let's remember Jordan Miller is a 5th-round pick. But I will also say the secondary as a whole, left me wanting more in the Miami game. I didn't think anybody played particularly well. I mean, Sheffield did make but also gave up a play and I think was called for a penalty. Bloody Ray Wilson was called for a penalty. I think Oliver was called for a penalty. There was a lot of penalties in this game, which Dan Quinn highlighted and something they need to clean up. But
a lot of silly ones. A lot of silly
stuff. Again, they shouldn't be doing. But again, it's early in the summer, and the hope is by the end of the preseason and head into the regular season, that'll get all cleaned up. But yeah, I wasn't excited about the secondary in general, so I don't want to point the finger too much at Jordan Miller because he wasn't the only one that was on the receiving end of some bad plays and some bad miscues. But yeah, those are my 3.
Yeah, my 3 down start with Bruce Carter. He's been getting pretty much all of the starting reps at the middle linebacker position. I just haven't been that impressed with what Bruce Carter has done. I thought he did some impressive things last year in limited opportunities. I think so far in the preseason he's been meh, like not bad or anything, just like I wish we could see a lot more. I've seen Campbell do things. I've seen Olakun do things. I've seen Jermaine Grace do things. And so for me, I want to see a little bit more from Bruce Carter, particularly if we're going to be like 5 linebackers. To me, it's going to be Deion Jones and Campbell and Olakun. And then for me, it's probably going to be Jermaine Grace and Kamal Ishmael. That's my 5 linebackers. I don't know if Bruce Carter has necessarily done much to reflect the trust that the team has in him, but he is a veteran player, so hopefully we'll get to see a little bit more of him, particularly if we don't see that much more of Deion Jones the rest of the summer, because I have the feeling the Falcons are probably going to hold him out for the entirety of the preseason. The other player I wanted to highlight, just based off of his performance against Miami, I thought had pretty higher expectations, and he didn't quite live up to them. Alan Bailey thought, we looked at that starting defensive front, and I thought Beasley did some good things, and Tack did some good things, and Jack Crawford did some things, and Tyler Davidson did some like Sean Harlow. I think I talked about him last week, so we'll probably just keep talking about Sean Harlow every single week until he actually plays well. I thought he did some positive things. He showed some ability as a second-level blocker. He made a great block downfield in that screenplay by Kenyon Barner, made a great block on Olason's touchdown run downfield. That's really what he does well, but, unfortunately, that's not all an offensive lineman does. And you've got to be able to pass protect. You got to be able to create movement off the snap at the line of scrimmage. And Harlow has not been doing that. He's been struggling quite a bit as a guard. I tweeted about this last week or over the weekend on Twitter and sort of being like, I'm of the opinion and have been on the opinion for quite a while that he's better suited to be a center rather than a guard. We saw this with Ben Garland. He was a player that was much more effective as a center than he was as a guard. I feel like Harlow would be the same way, but obviously we haven't really seen those opportunities for him to play center. He's pretty safe to say that he's well on his way out. And again, as I tweeted about, for him, I wish him the best, as Dan said at the top of the show, in regards to Ham Cheevers. I hope he catches on. And, if that other team, some other team picks him up or he winds up in the XFL or wherever he winds up continuing his football career, I hope that team decides to give him an opportunity at center. I don't know if the Falcons really, gave him that opportunity. I don't know if we got to see the better version of Sean Harlow, which, again, not to sit here and be like, oh, man, you would have moved him to the center and he would have been the next Alex Mack. Not saying that at all, but I do think maybe he would have been a little bit more of an effective player. Dan, go ahead and piggyback off of what we're talking about. Maybe some 3 guys that you had down this week.
So I actually have a little bit of a different direction because I'm actually going to be selling stock. Not necessarily that stock is down on these players, but I'm going to be selling some stock on some things. First of all, Wes Schweitzer is anything other than a center. I am going to be selling that stock. Wes Schweitzer played great as a center last game. And honestly, watching through the whole game, watching it a couple of times, watching the offensive line only, he held his own. He knew his assignments. He did a very good job of keeping the center clean. The left-hand side of the ball, though, from the left tackle, left guard, was atrocious. It was really, really bad. So I don't know what's going on over there. Not like we actually got to see any real starters late in the game, but Wes Schweitzer, I'm selling stock of him playing any other position than center. Number 2, I'm selling stock of Vic Beasley. as a full-time defensive end because I saw some amazing coverage from him last night. And amazing coverage as in I actually got to see him played in his natural position, which is a roaming outside linebacker, rushing linebacker. He did some really good things last night, showed some strength and power. But at the same time, playing him so many times down there as a, hand in the dirt defensive end seems to just be a recipe for disaster. Especially if you're giving him multiple reps at that a game. You're giving him 30, 40 reps in a game playing defensive end. I think a lot of that will calm down now that we've got, Kaminsky and Odom and Larkin and guys that are competing to potentially take some of those reps and ease some of the workload there. I'm also going to be selling Tavecchio. I'm going to be selling stock on Tavecchio, hitting anything that's above 45 yards. Let's keep him as close as possible so that we can hit everything. That last one was a meme, but seriously though, as far as the team has gone, there's not a lot of people that I'm really selling any, saying stock is completely down, like they're done or anything. I'm seeing a lot of battles still yet to be played out, but I know that things are solidified currently at certain areas. And certain parts of the depth. So I want to see more of the starters in. I want to see more of the how connected are they? How much is it going to take for this group to be ready for this season? Because I'm hearing good things and I'm seeing a few bits and pieces of good things, but nobody's really disappointed me to the point that I'm so upset, But yeah, anyway.
Okay, let's talk about this upcoming Jets game and talk about some of the things that we're going to be focused on. And, we're going to get to potentially see the debuts of a couple of players this preseason, potentially Duke Riley and some players coming back from injury, like Marcus Green coming back. We'll have to sort of see with James Carpenter. Matt, am I wrong in thinking that James Carpenter's, status is up in the air for this upcoming Jets game?
Yeah, I mean, like we talked about earlier, it hasn't practiced all week, it's been off to the side. Usually that means they're going to be a no-go for Thursday. That's, if I was placing money, that's where I'd place it, that James Carpenter's not going to play. And like you said, it gives a chance for Jamon Brown to further distance himself in this left guard battle, which, again, that's music to my ears. I was hoping all along Jamon Brown's the guy, and maybe you wouldn't want it to happen under these circumstances, but I think even if James Carpenter was healthy, I think it'd be a close battle. So either or, I'm not sure it'd make a huge difference. I think going with a guy like Jamon Brown, him then solidifying that spot for the next few years, that's best case scenario for the Falcons. Because again, that's what I've been saying all along. He's been the younger option with the greater potential. It's not just about the money. I do think he's more than just a stopgap, whereas if James Carpenter was the guy that they ultimately went with, I think you're going to be looking at left guard then as a potential weakness, maybe even next year. So with Jamon Brown potentially winning this job now and further distancing himself in this race, again, you might have a scenario where Jake Matthews is locked in at left tackle, Jamon Brown's locked in at left guard. We'll see how long we got still with Alex Mack. Lindstrom's going to be the right guard for hopefully the next decade, and then McGarry, the expectation is he's the right tackle for the next decade. So you can have this offensive line maybe for 3 more years, assuming Alex Mack can play till he's 35, 36, which I think is a possibility given, how great of a player Mack is, and, the assumption is he takes care of his body well, which that usually hasn't been an issue. So, yeah, I'd say James Carpenter, we're probably not going to see him until that third dress rehearsal preseason game. So we'll have to see what happens there in the battle. I'm sure they won't decide anything as far as who the left guard is until after that point. One other new competition that seems to be, out there now is at strong safety. We saw Parker Baldwin take a lot of snaps first up at strong safety this past week, and I was pretty impressed with his play, the way he can take on blockers. You had made the point, I think, on Twitter that he's basically like an undersized linebacker there, which is kind of the role that the strong safety plays in this defense. I mean, granted, he has to show the athletic ability to play man-to-man at times in coverage, and that's, maybe what we have a question on with Kamal Ishmael. So if Parker Baldwin continues to see time, I mean, we're going to see Keanu Neal, I think, for at least a series or two this week. But if Parker Baldwin's the next man up and continues to show out in that role, he's a guy that might slot in there now at one of those final spots, and maybe the team will bump Kamal back to linebacker, which, again, we saw in Miami. So that's something I'm keeping my eye on now going forward that I wasn't necessarily expecting is Parker Baldwin, who's a guy, again, the team had a lot of interest in. He was one of their top 30 visitors during draft season. So he's a guy that the team did a lot of homework on, and it might pay off in a big way as their backup strong safety.
Dan, I'm curious to get your thoughts on the whole strong safety depth thing. Niesman served in that capacity last season. The Falcons brought in J.J. Wilcox.
Yuck.
He went down with an injury on the first day of practice. They moved Kamal Ishmael there for 2 weeks. Played against the Broncos at the safety spot, but then I think due to injuries at the linebacker position, got pushed into the linebacker role this past week against Miami, and that opened the door, as Matt mentioned, for a guy like Parker Baldwin. Sort of, Matt and I have very vocally been for like the last 3 months pounding the table, like, why are the Falcons disrespecting Sherrod Niesman? He's perfectly fine as the backup strong safety. The issue is, the other safety, because you got Casey balling at the nickel cornerback, you want to have another option there in the event that, Ricardo Allen misses some time. But I am curious, sort of, where's your thoughts on the Falcons safety depth and whether certain guys have stood out to you, or maybe if you could whisper into Dan Quinn's ear, sort of be like, do it this way, Dan. This is the way that you should do it.
I wish I could be a fly on the wall in Dan Quinn's stuff and whisper things in there, and he'd be like, "Whoa, what? Let's do it this way." No, it's funny because you guys are honestly about to get into the alignments and everything and what you think about that, but it kind of goes hand in hand where you're talking about like how these positions are evolving and what particular players fit that evolution versus where their physical and athletic gifts kind of, just from the base looks, at least that's what we hope and from what we see that what they're giving us. That strong safety has to come down and bump that tight end and then also be able to backpedal and cover that. I know Neal can do that, and he's impressed. He's gotten better at that. Obviously, we haven't seen him for most of the year, so we're hoping that he can come back strong this year and be able to continue to provide that. But a guy like Parker really does remind me just of another Keanu Neal. Maybe just aren't they close to the same size? Maybe he's a little bit smaller than Neal currently. I can't remember that size. I don't want to misquote and speak wrongly, but to me, it really is just one of those things. It's like you almost have to have another linebacker back there, and Keanu Neal almost fits that role without a problem. And Parker Baldwin also just fits that role very, very well. And so you're going to see evolutions here within certain players and certain depth pieces that are going to be doing some things a little bit differently. And we are all trained, Matt, Aaron, myself, the chat, we're all trained in different philosophies or ideas of how a defense is supposed to be run, or how, the old history is supposed to show you what the future is supposed to be. And if you look at the way that, the Bear defense and those things have been utilized and the type of players that have been utilized in those defenses, we have everything to run the updated version of those defenses and still run that 70% nickel look, which is insane that you can have that much athletic talent and the depth behind it that fits the nuance cookie cutter. So there's not a name that really jumps out to me, but there are guys on this roster that fit that athletic mold and that positional mold right now.
Just to run the listeners through the specs of Parker Baldwin, Keanu Neal. Parker Baldwin, a shade under 6'1", 202 pounds, 4'5", 640, 32-inch vertical, 10-foot 4-inch broad. Keanu Neal, what do we got? 6 foot, 211 pounds, so maybe he's 5 to 10 pounds more. And by all intents and purposes, Baldwin could have bulked up too. We don't know exactly. Those were just pro day measurements. So Keanu, 6 foot, 211, 4'5", 940. The vert's a little bit tall, longer, 38 inches, and then his broad jump was a stupid 12 feet, if I'm doing that, Matt. It was 132 inches, so it might have been 12 foot.
That's 11 feet.
Yeah, no, 11 feet. Sorry, 11 feet. So about 8 inches more. Still pretty ridiculous, but so that, and we see that in the explosiveness that Keanu Neal has demonstrated throughout his career. Parker Baldwin maybe not as explosive, obviously, but like Dan mentioned, they are kind of similar athletic molds and profiles. And Sherrod Niesman maybe isn't quite that level of athlete, but I do think, again, we saw enough from him that I don't know why they feel like the free safety center field role is his best fit, which is where, again, they're having him. And it does seem like he has the edge over Chris Cooper. I thought Cooper would be more of an asset there, a fit there, but he hasn't, separated himself from Niesman at all. So right now, if I had to guess, I'd say Niesman's the backup free safety, assuming they don't bump Casey back there, which they likely would if there was an injury again. But that's been my thing, really. Is I just think it's more of a misfit for Niesman to be at free safety than it is Niesman's not a good fit or not, up to the task of being the backup strong safety. So I mean, I'm more adamant in that sector.
You're adamant. You're adamant in the actual position. What that guy does well at his position.
If he's going to be on, I think it has to be. I think it's backup strong safety spot, not at the backup free safety spot. And that's where I had my disagreement with the coaching staff. And again, he wasn't. He graded out pretty decently according to Pro Football Focus as far as backup strong safeties go last year. So I don't know where they saw something in the tape where it's like, yeah, we need to try him at free safety if we're going to salvage any part of him still being here. That's where I don't.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's where I don't quite understand it, but maybe I'm missing something.
I just looked back at the traditional formations in 34 and 5-2 and just tried to see those player archetypes. And I'm not saying that this is right, because I believe you as well that he should be a backup strong safety. But if there's a prototype that a player potentially fits in that mold, then I think Dan Quinn is the type of aggressive coach that's going to find the prototype before he tries to find this player fits well at strong safety, and so we're going to keep him at strong safety and then compete against everybody else, but he doesn't work for the defense that they're trying to do. I mean, kind of looking at like Vic Beasley and Ty McKinley and Deion Jones, they're already fits for what we're looking to run. So
I think you can maybe say the same. You always hear the archetype of the Seattle cornerback, the long, tall, physical. Dan Quinn's all about that. So I mean, maybe that is the point to make, that Niesman doesn't fit the archetype of what the box.
It's not that he's not a good player. It's not that he's not a good player and that he doesn't belong on this team. But maybe they're trying to find a spot to keep him on the team for whatever reason, and keep an archetype still going with everything else so that it never drops.
My only suggestion or answer to that would be, look at Ricardo Allen. I don't think he's the archetype for what a center field free safety, rangy, roamy player is. Like, he's not necessarily Earl Thomas. Like, Earl Thomas is the vision that you want to be in. There's only one Earl Thomas. Yeah, there's only one Earl Thomas out there, so you can't necessarily duplicate that. But you can certainly find a more rangy player. But again, Ricardo Allen has made it work. I mean, he's been the starting free safety now and going on his 5th year.
He's used his mental gifts to be able to be where he needs to be when the ball is released.
So maybe that's the advantage. Again, the mental aspect of strong safety isn't what we're saying here. We're saying physical, actual attributes, and again, Sherrod Niesman doesn't necessarily have those. So maybe that's it. But Aaron, anything? I mean, we've talked about this, as you know, so I'm sure you've said your piece many times. But any thoughts about what Dan's saying about the physical attributes of Sherrod Niesman not necessarily fitting what Quinn may look for in the strong safety type?
Look, I don't 100% agree, but I feel like it's not like that's a fair pace. We'll that's a fair statement. That's a fair viewpoint. So we've talked about it ad nauseum. So I'm not going to necessarily feel compelled to be like Dan's wrong on this issue. Like I don't know. We'll see what plays out. And I think Baldwin's done
It's worth a thought though, because again, there's got to be some reason behind it.
We'll never be inside the heads of the coaches, right?
Because, right. No, and one thing that just came to my head is talked about when they were rotating Jordan Richards and Sherrod Niesman last year. He specifically brought up the fact that Jordan Richards has a little bit more girth to him, for lack of a better term, to hold up in the physical, the box aspect of it. And so that's why, he would get those reps. And then in the nickel situations, you'd have Sherrod Niesman come in because he can hold up more in the coverage end, the back end of it. So again, maybe that has a lot to do with it. We don't necessarily have to agree with it, but maybe that's the thinking behind it. Who knows?
I mean, I know Aaron's adamant about a certain style of football, not only offensively and defensively. I know that I've had conversations with you on Twitter about you being very adamant about a certain way that things are supposed to go. And I have my own biases as well, but I've tried to keep myself as open as possible going, I don't know everything. And I mean, obviously you guys probably have that same mentality.
No, my mentality
but
is I
at the same time,
yeah,
but kind of sitting back here and going, we are seeing something different before our eyes. Let's invite it in and just let it happen. Like, let's just see how this goal kind of not wait and see, because I hate that idea. But like, I definitely want to invite it in, let it roam through my house and see what happens. And then, if the house burns down, then I get to report about it. If the house doesn't burn down and everything's good, then then cool, we get something different to talk about and go, wow, that's an evolution process that we didn't see coming out from left field, but it worked.
Look, what I'll say is Niesman, I think, has played decent at the free safety position. The issue, I guess, is more a preseason issue, not necessarily a Niesman issue, is that because preseason offense is so bad and so vanilla that, basically playing cover 3 is basically kryptonite for a preseason offense. Like no backup quarterback can beat cover 3 unless you have a Preston Williams doing what he did against the Dolphins. So it's one of those things where you don't really get to test these deep safeties quite a bit. We didn't really see, Brian Poole and Robinson Thorese and DeMonte Casey. And, the thing that Casey did last summer was he made plays. He was overthrows, he was picking those off and whatnot. And we haven't really seen that from Niesman. But again, I don't necessarily know if that's what Niesman is going to really be at that position. Again, Hawkins' plan is, look, we want to have a guy that can do both. We want a guy, we know Niesman can do strong safety stuff. We want to see if he can do the free safety stuff, and that gives us the maximum leverage in terms of building our depth chart, in terms of building our roster, so that now we only really need to keep 3 safeties active. Keanu Neal, Ricardo Allen, and Sherrod Niesman, because Niesman can do both. Maybe that's yet to sort of figure out. So I am open-minded, contrary to what I just said, but it is one of those things where I do feel like ultimately, I like Sherrod Niesman a little bit more at the strong safety position. But so far, the results at free safety haven't been anything close to a disaster. So I'm curious to see what happens over the next couple of weeks.
I definitely have to say that I like sitting here with Matt and looking at Freeman sweat, because Freeman is the type of guy that wants a lot of depth, but he's having these situations right now where it's just,
Yeah.
Well, I'm sweating because it's hot. It's the earth is cooking right now, so that's the main issue.
I don't know.
All right, let's. Anything we want to talk about with this Jets game, or do we want to move on and get into these mailbag questions? Or we got an announcement to make before we get into mailbag questions. But anything?
I think we can do the announcement. As far as the Jets game, I'm just looking at more of the same stuff we talked about. Do guys like Russell Gage, Brian Hill, Jermaine Odom, do they continue their strong summers, continue to maybe cement themselves on the 53-man roster? I am curious. Dan brought up wanting to see some more of the starters. I want to see more of the starters just so I know certain things like, again, with the defense in this 5-2 base package, it seems like now it's going to the point where it's 2 inside middle linebackers essentially in the base. So does that mean a guy like Foye Oluokun is more of a backup reserve guy when we maybe originally thought he's a starting linebacker in the base? So those are the questions that are still on my mind that, again, I want to see the starters in there. But I think, Aaron, you said Deion Jones likely not going to play in the preseason, which I agree with. So I don't know if we'll necessarily get an answer to that one in the preseason, but those are the things on my mind. But, again, preseasons for evaluations, answering some of these questions. I don't have anything, about the matchup or anything. I probably won't about any of these preseason games. I'm just looking at some unanswered questions. I think, again, for me, the 53-man roster, I only have it down to like 3 spots for the most part. I think, whether it's the final receiver spot, between Hardy, Zacchaeus, Blake, and Gray. Again, assuming they don't carry 7, it's a possibility, but I think that would have to boil down to Green locking up the return game job, which again, at the current state, I don't see that happening. But again, there's an opportunity now with Green in and 7th receiver and 11th defensive lineman. I think there's one spot up for grabs, and that'll be determined by some of these position battles. I think Parker Baldwin's the perfect example. I think if he continues to show in that role as the backup strong safety, they might keep him around. He might not be active on game days because of the versatility we talked about at safety and some of the other spots, but he can certainly sneak on that 53-man spot. So I think a lot of it is answered with the roster. Again, there's a couple games that maybe could flip that. I mean, if we see huge improvement from Duke Riley, again, that can flip the script a little bit. But yeah, there's not a lot that I'm really looking at, or from a matchup standpoint, just some of these unanswered questions that we've talked about frequently on the show.
Yeah, neither do I. I don't really have anything that I'm currently looking at the Jets game for. There's, like Matt said, this 53 is already locked up, and really you're just looking at practice squad at this particular point. Like, while we still don't know the names that'll be there, there's ample opportunity for most of this roster to pretty much be done. So, it's kind of funny that the Falcons, of all teams who have had a lot of things that they've had to change up, are pretty much locked up. Like they already knew from the start. So it's very, very weird. Like they knew the moment that the draft was over that their roster was good. It wasn't until the Means injury and the Bennett injury that they really made any real acquisitions whatsoever. And even those changes it was 1 for 1. Like, I mean, maybe the Bailey acquisition is the only one that I think is probably 2 for 1, where you get, much of an upgrade over, just having Means and Bennett. But which will be another interesting conversation because Bennett will be, I believe, back with Atlanta by week 9 or something like that.
I don't think Bennett can come back.
So I wonder if they.
I think because.
I'm not sure. I'm just that's what I.
I think because if you're put on the injured reserve before the final cuts, you can't come back from the injured reserve. That's what I believe the rule is.
Mm. I wonder how that situation will kind of ease itself out. That'll be interesting to see what the Falcons do going forward with that. But yeah, the Jets game is, I'll be streaming it and watching. That's about it.
All right, Matt, you mentioned that you wanted to hold off on the announcement until at the very end of the show.
Yeah, let's go through the questions first, and then before Dan plugs his stuff, I can reveal.
All right, let's get into the first mailbag question from Justin Sandu at Justin201224. He asks, who is the current leader in the return battle?
Kenyon Barner.
Yeah, probably Barner.
I would.
Just because Green didn't get off to a hot start, and then he was out last week. That's kind of, when that happens, it opens the door for other guys, and Barner's kind of, he did some good things last week. So
shades of 2018, where we didn't necessarily know who the starter at kick returner, punt returner was, and we were going through a bunch of different guys, and we have Barner now, so he's kind of got the spot currently.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Next question comes from Noel Rodriguez at Volta Noel 2020. Do you think we will have Sambrailo start half the season because of McGarry's heart issue?
I think it's possible. I think, we're supposed to get an update on McGarry's situation. I would expect maybe Friday. But, depending on how that update goes, I've speculated that maybe McGarry starts on, the PUP or the NFI non-football injury list, depending on how they want to designate him. Probably NFI because it's a health-related issue that he's carried throughout his career. Means the same thing. He would be out the first 6 weeks though. Then, so at that point, once he comes back, I don't expect him to go into the starting lineup right away. So yeah, does play half the season. So we'll have to see. But I think it's definitely a possibility.
It's not the worst thing in the world. It's not the worst thing in the world to ease a guy like McGarry in slowly, even if he comes back from that injury very quickly. Freeman's smiling his ass off because he knows that I've been a huge Sombrello supporter. But in all honesty, I want McGarry to start. I just want him to be put in the process at the correct time. And right now, especially with before the heart concern, I think I was ready to accept McGarry to slowly eat this job and get it. But now I really am a little more cautious, and I want him to take his time, not only himself, but the coaches, and then eventually slide into this role and be the starter for many, many years to come, honestly. But yeah, probably about 7-8 games before we actually hear any real McGarry news.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say it's not the worst thing to have Ty Sambrello start half the season, and I was like, wait, let's wait and see what Danielle Hunter and Brandon Graham do the first 2 games before we make those claims. But yeah, I think what the timetable is for McGarry. We've heard various reports that we've heard guys come back from having this surgery after just a month. We've heard guys with McGarry, it took him 8 weeks the last time he had this issue during his college days. So. That timetable sort of puts it probably somewhere between like week 2 and week 6 before he can even start to practice again, just because he's going to be like on blood thinners, and that's really determining sort of how his body reacts to that. Again, I'm not a doctor or anything, but based off of everything I read about that, it's just like how his body deals with the blood thinners and when he gets off the blood thinners, and then you would assume that it's going to take him at least 2 weeks of practicing before the Falcons would feel good about throwing him into the lineup. So that adds to the timetable. So as Matt indicated, we won't really get an update on sort of where he is. It's just going to be something that the Falcons are going to sort of have to monitor his progress, and if there are positive gains. I don't know if the Falcons will put him on a reserve list if they feel like he could come back at some point before the end of September, and they'll just decide to just stash him on the roster and have Matt Gano, be the swing tackle for the first month of the season. We'll have to sort of see how it plays out. But, I think we all would probably agree that there's a better than average chance that we will see Caleb McGarry get some starts by the end of the season. But maybe Ty Sambrello, comes and does the thing that I think is, impossible, and actually impresses us and winds up holding on to this starting job for the entirety of the season. So we'll just have to see how it plays out.
Because there's no tape to prove the difference. I mean,
Anyway, let's get into Jelani 234's questions. He's got a couple of questions. He asks, the first one is, how do you feel about the depth on the D-line?
I'm good with it. I want to see it play out. I think you got Jarrett and Crawford as the 3 techs. You got Bailey and Kaminsky as the strong side defensive end 5 techs. And then, Vic tack. I'm curious to see if Claiborne's going to stand up and play some edge. I don't think so. I think he's going to be kind of that nickel interior guy still at times, or, a nickel 3-point stance defensive lineman, defensive end. So that's why if I am concerned about anything, it's the depth at edge. Because if a guy like Tack or Vic need a breather or go out for the game, you're awfully thin. You're probably going to have to use Devondre Campbell at edge, which again, I'm curious to see him in that role. I think he can excel times, especially if Foy continues to progress and can be that other inside middle linebacker and allow Campbell to rush the quarterback off the edge. But so that's my only concern. I want to see it play out now. I think they've added the pieces that we're going to see play the majority of the snaps, and it's all about just how they put it together on the field. So I'm, at this point, I'm cool with it. We got to deal with it because I don't expect any major moves going forward, really.
Dan?
The current D-line, exceptional. And I know a lot of people are outliers because, Bailey's been rusty, or, we have a lot of big boys in the middle and they're not creating pressure. I think the Dolphins game pretty much silenced that for me, because you saw Davison get pressure. You saw Crawford get pressure. Bailey was having some struggles, but he was able to collapse the pocket a bit. And really in its own light, the way that we've changed systems slightly. I don't know if it's going to carry over into the regular season. I hope it does, because this is great for our edges. But we haven't even seen Grady Jarrett play, and Sanat has had limited snaps throughout the whole game, and he's looked good. So it's just one player after another that's done some great things currently up through 2 preseason games, and there's still guys that haven't even played. So I'm really, really excited about the D line as a whole. It's awesome. I can't wait to see it in its full starting setup and see it actually go after people. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
Yeah, look, I said I wasn't that impressed with Allen Bailey, but it was mostly contrasting him with how the other guys were playing, and I'm not at all concerned about what Allen Bailey's going to do moving forward. It was just, everybody else.
It wasn't direct. It wasn't direct.
No. I wanted to clarify.
General,
I hope people aren't saying like Aaron thinks Allen Bailey stinks. Like, no, I don't think that. I think he's going to be solid. So, the point of that is, I do, like you guys say, I like the D line depth. I like what with Crawford looks good. Bailey, I think, will start to look good in the coming days. I think Davison's looking solid. I think Sanat's done some good things when he's got the opportunity to play his more natural nose tackle rather than 3-tech. But, the Falcons giving him those reps as a 3-tech does add to the versatility, similar to what we were just talking about with Sherrod Niesman. Obviously Grady Jarrett's going to be solid. Kaminsky's shown progress. And some promise moving forward. So you look at that interior D-line rotation. I thought Hageman, for the 2 snaps he played against Denver, looked really good relative to what the last time we saw Rashid Hageman. And so if he can continue to show that, over these next couple of games in the preseason, then that only adds to the D-line depth. So I think right now the D-line group is really looking good, and the edge group, Tack and Vic, look natural. Claiborne, of course, is going to be Adrian Claiborne in the mix, steady veteran. It goes back to what Matt said. The depth there at the edge is a little questionable, but I do think Austin Larkin and Chris Oldham have shown flashes. I think Uric Bethune's done some good things as well. I think Trey Crawford flashed some potential there. So whether or not these guys are quite played at a level where the Falcons feel good about putting these guys on the roster, I think remains to be seen. But certainly we got 3 or 4 guys that have certainly played their way potentially on whether it's this team's practice squad or another team's practice squad. So I do think, some of the questions with the D-line depth have been somewhat answered. So I do feel relatively good. Again, if, somebody good becomes available at the end of the waiver wire, I'm not going to say no to the Falcons enhancing their D-line depth and getting better there. But certainly I don't feel like, looking at that unit, it is as much of a concern as it seemed like it could have been in a lot of people's eyes, a month or 2 ago. So Jelani's next question is, I believe one area where we lack veteran depth is our DB group. What are your thoughts on the group as a whole?
I'm not as concerned about the youth of the group that maybe some are, and the unknown that it's going to bring. I'm high on Isaiah Oliver. I think this is all part of the team's plan and why they brought him in to begin with. And what I saw from him towards the end of the year in limited snaps, I think he can handle that cornerback 2 role on the outside opposite Trufant. KZ, I think, again, all along, KZ's, while they did cross-chain him at free safety, I think the plan was to put him in the nickel at some point in his career. A lot of draft pundits saw him as the best nickel corner coming out of the 2017 class, and we saw how much of a playmaker he is back at free safety. So now putting him closer to the ball, I think that's only going to improve his ability as a playmaker to get his hands on the football and create turnovers like Dan Quinn looks for from his defense. So the top 3 look good. The depth, again, maybe is a little bit of a question. We know what we can expect from Blitty Ray Wilson. While there's limitations to him, he's always been solid when called upon. And again, I think, the two youngsters, the draft picks, Jordan Miller, Kendall Sheffield, I've always been a huge Jordan Miller fan. I thought that was one of their best underrated picks. And then obviously we know what the team likes in Kendall Sheffield. I mean, he made a great ball against Miami this past week. He offers that speed, that recovery. If he does get beat, that he can make that up in a hurry. So again, getting those guys reps, I think if they're called upon, sure they're going to take some lumps, but I don't think it's any different than a guy like Caleb McGarry. He would take his lumps if he's at right tackle going up against the Daniil Hunters and the Brandon Grahams of the world. So I'm fine if they're pressed into duty and they take some lumps because I think the team will only be better in the long run for it. I had speculated that maybe they'd go after a veteran cornerback, a guy like Orlando Scandrick, who has now since been picked up by Philly. But I think at the end of the day, whoever they would have picked up, I mean, you're likely going to want those guys to play special teams, which, again, I'm not sure the veteran corners on the market are that type of role, and they want to, be in that three cornerback set, that starter look. I think Scandrick probably was in that same boat and might get that opportunity in Philly, whereas in Atlanta, I think, again, the top three are solidified. You're looking for depth pieces, guys willing and able to play special teams, and I think, you're going to get that more from Jordan Miller and Kendall Sheffield. And again, those guys can be developed into potentially being starting outside cornerbacks down the road. So yeah, I'm cool with it. I'm higher on this group than I think maybe some are, and some may be concerned about the youth. But I think again, it's all part of the team's plan. They've been their track record developing cornerbacks, drafting cornerbacks has been pretty good. Defense backs in general. So I think I'm taking that also into consideration when in my answer, my approach, and my confidence in this group.
Yeah, I like the group as a whole. It's got a very youthful look to it. It's got a lot of guys that have got a lot of speed and ball hawking ability. In one way or another, it's not necessarily all ball hawks, but the group as a whole, while young and some will say inexperienced, I think is very talented. It has a lot of opportunity to grow. There are a lot. It's very interesting. A lot of those guys are all very Dan Quinn-esque when it comes to fast, physical, and are all hungry. Every single one of them is hungry to play the way that Dan Quinn's asking them to do. So Jordan Miller's being let free. Sheffield's being let free. Oliver, in what looks we have seen from last year and from the preseason, has looked very, very good. So I'm not as down, like Matt has said. There's a lot of people that are saying that, we need to add some depth just so that they feel like there's a security blanket for themselves. But at the end of the day, I think it's just let the reins go, let the horse take you where it's going to go. And this is a good group. This is a very, very good group, solid young guys. I don't necessarily think that we need another veteran. We've got guys on this team that are going to do just fine.
Yeah, for me, look, I question the depth at a lot of places on this team, but the cornerback position, not necessarily one I'm overly concerned with. They have a lot of youth. They have a lot of sort of unproven players, guys that haven't played a lot of snaps at their current roles, Oliver, Casey, and whatnot. But, for me, it's one of those things where I'm willing, if you call that a roll of the dice, I'm willing to roll the dice on those guys. I'm willing to see what Sheffield and Miller do off the bench. I think, as Matt mentioned, Bleedy Ray Wilson is a solid sort of veteran option there. So I feel like the top six corners are fine. Again, we'll see what those guys do in the regular season. I think specifically with a guy like Isaiah Oliver, I think Stephon Diggs is going to be one of the tougher matchups that he's going to face all season long. And if he holds his own against Stephon Diggs in week one, then, I think the sky's the limit for what type of season we can expect from Oliver. And same thing with Casey. He's going to get a lot of opportunities potentially going up against Adam Thielen in that game. And that's going to tell us sort of how he can handle some of the best receivers in the league. So, we're really what those guys do, until we get to September is sort of whatever. For me, the only position at the DB group that I think you can raise questions is that safety group. Going back to what we said, do you feel good with Niesman being able to play both? You want him to play one? You feel good with Parker Baldwin needing to potentially step in for Keanu Neal with J.J. Wilcox? Again, that's one of the questions you have to have is, Dan Quinn said during the offseason, and it raised my eyebrows and maybe not other people's, in terms of like they felt that they had a hole at strong safety. They signed J.J. Wilcox. J.J. Wilcox got hurt. Is Parker Baldwin now answering that question, filling that hole at the strong safety position? Is Kamal Ishmael their option there? So, again, it's not to sit here and be like, this is a pressing concern. I want to see how these guys perform over the next couple of games, see sort of before, we panic or anything. But certainly I think, there's an opportunity potentially if the Falcons aren't necessarily comfortable at that safety group and could add a veteran at the end of the waiver wire. I tweeted out a couple of weeks ago when ESPN bloggers put out their 53-man roster projections and tweeted a whole bunch of strong safeties that are projected to be cut, guys like Obi Melifonwu with the Patriots, Sua Cravens with the Broncos, and a couple of other guys. And so if some of those guys get cut and the Falcons go out and claim those guys off of waivers, look, I certainly not going to complain if the Falcons decide to upgrade their safety depth. So right now, I feel pretty good about the secondary right now. I think the safety position is the only real question mark, but I feel like there is a pretty good chance that between now and the end of the preseason, that question could be answered by guys like Baldwin and potentially Kamal Ishmael and Sherrod Neesman as well. So, last question comes from Jelani. Outside of the return battle, what other position battle do we still believe we have at this moment?
So I just tweeted out a couple of tweets on Falcons PFC, kind of showing where I think the roster is right now. I think 47, not including the 3 specialists, 47 spots are kind of, in my opinion, kind of certain. I think 3 potential roster spots still remain. I think a final wide receiver spot. I talked about between Hardy, Zacchaeus, Blake Gray. I think those are the 4 battling for that. Now, again, if they want to keep Hardy, but they want to keep a 7th receiver, you could see 2 of those guys then make it. I think a 10th D-line spot is still up for grabs. That's, between Hagman, Zimmer, Odom, Larkin, Bethune. I think those are the top guys battling out for that. And then kind of what's ever left over, whether it's, holding on to Marker Baldwin to be that safety, again, if you're considering Kamal Ishmael safety, or whether it's Barner. I've been saying the return battle spot really does cause ripple waves throughout the rest of the roster. So if he wins the job, I think Green's kind of safe just because he's a draft pick. You're then kind of saying you're keeping 5 running backs again, because I think Hill, I don't see, unless he completely flames out these last 3 weeks, I don't see a scenario that doesn't have him on the 53-man roster anymore. I think he's proven enough to the coaching staff at this point, rounding out his game, adding a pass catching element, contributing now on special teams even. I think he's nearing on safe territory. One more good preseason game, and I think it's all but a lock, in my opinion. So that final spot can go a bunch of different ways. It can go maybe 11th D lineman. It can go, an extra linebacker. It can be used on an outside free agent. I agree with you, Aaron. I think if not for edge, I think safety is a spot where the Falcons could go on the waiver wire heading into the season. I think those 2 spots I have my biggest concern about, maybe adding a piece there. So I think there's 3 roster spots right now heading into preseason week 3 that are up for grabs.
The only positional battles I see are really for not even the depth purposes. I think it's actually for snaps. I think there's still a battle to be had through the rest of this preseason between Quadri Olison and Brian Hill. I think there's going to be a really interesting battle. I want to see more from them because I just recently went back and watched Quadri tape and then turned on James Conner tape and saw the same exact player. And I know a lot of people will be like, that's different. You look at what he's done with the Steelers. Actually, if you go back and look at his stuff with Pitt, it's very eerily similar. So there's something that's still yet to be unlocked in the speed of the game to change for Quadri. But I think that's interesting because I think Brian Hill, reluctantly from my end, has done very well and has proven that he can be on this team and take a spot on this roster. But kind of like what Matt was saying, it's just kind of everything's kind of already done. And really it came down to like returner, one extra defensive lineman, and then snaps pretty much just for everybody. I mean, I think Dejan Sanat might actually beat one of these guys out for snaps at 3-tech. And I know that's an unpopular opinion, but from what I saw in his Dolphins game, especially late in the game and watching his number throughout the whole night, he looked dominant. So he should definitely be playing against the 2s and 1s in this coming few matchups, and we'll see if he can garner more snaps going forward, because I know he was a healthy scratch over McLean last year, which was really disappointing from a lot of perspectives. And I know you guys are probably disappointed too when McLean's out there doing nothing and Sanat came in and had a couple of snaps and did really, really well. So, but yeah, that's where I'm sitting currently.
Look, the biggest position battle left on the team is quarterback. If Matt Ryan doesn't come out and play well against this Jets game, then I think it's Matt Schaub's job for the taking.
Sims.
So, all right, obviously kidding. Let's Matt, go ahead and pick the winner.
Okay. So you have no thoughts on position battles? You're gonna?
No, I mean I think you guys nailed it. I think you nailed it.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I'm pleased to announce Zach Caruso at Caruso_Zach was the lucky winner of the Hall of Fame game advisor. So the Falcons PFC Twitter account will be in contact with you, Zach. Kind of figure out where we should send this to you. We'll have one more. I have one more giveaway from the Hall of Fame game, so I'll probably send out a tweet of that on Wednesday. Appreciate everyone that participated, and be on the lookout again for giveaway number 2, and give another shot at potentially winning something from the Hall of Fame game.
Matt, say who won it again. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Zach Caruso.
All right, thank you.
At Caruso_Zach.
All right. So now, Dan, this is your opportunity to go ahead and plug your show. We appreciate you coming on and gracing this humble show with your vaulted presence, and bringing some of your listeners over to discover our show, and hopefully the 5 people that watch our show that don't watch your show now can move on and give you a little bit of a bump as well. So go ahead and plug everybody where they can find your stuff, what you got coming up over the next couple of days, and anything else you want to plug.
Well, first of all, you speak too kindly of me. I am but a humble Falcons fan and servant of this illustrious Falcons fan base that loves to hate and sling its toxicity. But you guys can find me at Unintentional Grounding on YouTube, as well as UNGR_show on Twitter and Instagram. You can find me on Twitch as well as Unintentional Grounding. I play some video games over there and talk Falcons football on my time off to just enjoy myself. I've got quite a few projects that are going to be coming up. Chris Lindstrom's film breakdown is already done, so that'll be coming out soon. Hope you guys enjoyed that one. That was a lot of fun. I can't believe I had so much fun on an offensive lineman's film breakdown, but this was absolutely exciting. As well as I do have a Deidre Sanat video that's going to be coming out as well, and a Jaden Graham video that I'm just going to – it's just really more highlights of his ability to run as a route runner and get open, and showcase some of his blocking as well. I think it's more of a technical breakdown than it is for, fun and just regular education. But that being said, I'll be streaming Thursday night live for everybody for the Jets game. So come and join us there. I believe that's at 7:30 or 8, something along those lines. The tweet will go out. But thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it, guys. Getting to meet Matt for the first time in person. Through the interwebs. But thank you. Appreciate it.
All right.
Yeah, thanks again.
So this is where we'll leave you guys out. For our regular listeners, we plug this every week, but for anybody new checking us out, you can follow us on our Twitter handles. You can see those on the screen. And Falcons fans, Matt Karoly. The show's Twitter handle is Falcons PFC. If you want to get in your mailbag questions, best way is send it over to Falcons PFC. Use the hashtag Falcons Mailbag. That's a great way to get us. Of course, you can subscribe to us on YouTube, Pro Football Central. YouTube page. Make sure you hit that bell icon. Give us a like on Facebook at Falcon Central Radio there. You can find all of our links to the audio version. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on iTunes. We're on Stitcher. You can find all the links to that at profootballcentral.com. Matt, anything else you want to add before we duck out of here?
No, that's it. We'll see you next week, guys. Appreciate you tuning in.
All right, everybody. See you guys.